Hi everyone. It's great to see you again. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today, we have a brand new story to share with you. So, let's get started. I never thought I'd be the type of man who would find himself in this state. But there I was, on the edge of my bed, looking at my phone as I tried to figure out what had come over me. It all began with a text message, no setup, just one text that turned my whole world upside down. You need to know what your wife does when you're not around. A picture was attached to it. My wife, laughing and smiling while leaning too close to a man I know. Not just any man, Tom, my friend. They were sitting in a booth at a diner, and her hand was on his thigh. It made my stomach hurt. I really wanted to think it was okay. I did not understand what she meant, but the way she looked at him in that picture, cozy and close, made me angry. I didn't answer the text right away. I looked through my phone for hints I didn't even know I was looking for while I sat there. All of a sudden, everything made sense. It was the late nights, her new desire for girls' nights out, and the fact that she had been emotionally and physically distant. I kept going over all of my excuses and mysterious trips in my head like puzzle pieces fitting together. My hands were shaking even though I tried to stay cool. I felt stupid and totally caught off guard. I had to know the answers right away. I had to wait for her to get home. Late that night, when she walked in happy and acting like nothing was wrong, I thought I was going to blow up. I told you straight out. I showed her the picture message on my phone and asked her to explain. She looked at it and then at me for a moment. Almost right away, her face went from shock to angry. What makes you think you should believe this crap? She lost it. I think you're crazy. I was so scared I wanted to scream. I instead pushed her to tell me the truth. That something seemed off for weeks, and I told her that the pieces didn't fit together, but she wouldn't move. She went even further and called me controlling and anxious. She made it seem like the issue was with me and that I was making things up. And I might have had doubts about myself for a second. I might have been too upset. I might have been letting my feelings get the best of me. Then I thought of the look she had in her eyes in that picture, a look she hadn't given me in months. I asked to look at her phone. Things changed about her after that. She grabbed it with both hands as if her life depended on it. She yelled, "You don't trust me. This is the exact reason why our marriage is breaking up." What I heard made no sense to me. She was being mean to me and acting like I was the one who was ruining our relationship. That's when I knew. She wasn't even trying to say she wasn't sure anymore. Her only goal was to hide what she had done by making me look like the bad guy. I wished to keep going. I had to get her to say it. But I lost it. I couldn't stand to see her. She was yelling after me as I slammed the door behind me as I left. I had to get air. There was room for me to think. The most important thing for me was to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I knew this wasn't over deep down. That night, I didn't sleep. I was unable to. My mind was racing, going over every talk and moment that felt like it wasn't real. I considered leaving, putting my things away, and never coming back. But I couldn't let go of something inside me. Not yet. I needed a resolution. Answers. Something other than her lies and empty reasons. She didn't say or do anything the next morning. She came into the kitchen, made coffee, and tried to talk to me about plans for the weekend, like the night before had been a bad dream. I didn't follow along. She knew it even though I didn't say a word. Even though there was a lot of stress, she tried to act like everything was fine. She then talked about the party. Lisa, one of our friends, was apparently having a small get-together that Saturday. My wife brought it up without much thought, as if it were just another social event we had to go to. But I had a different view. It seemed like a chance to me. She almost spoke too quickly as she watched my response and said, "Tom will be there." My jaw got tight, but I didn't show her how badly it hurt. Instead, I just said yes and felt like going. She was wrong to think that I would let her show off her affair in front of me. Going out on Saturday made me feel like I was going into enemy country. As soon as we walked through the door, I could feel eyes on me. There was talk and laughing in the room, but it all felt fake, like everyone knew something I didn't. They might have, too. My wife quickly made her rounds, greeting everyone with a smile and a chat like a great hostess. Then I saw him. Tom was standing by the bar with a drink in his hand and looked just as smug as I thought he would. He saw me too, but he didn't look away or act like he didn't see me. Instead, he grinned, as if he already had the upper hand. I wanted to hit him right then, but I knew it wasn't the right time. I waited. As I watched, I noticed that some people looked at me with sympathy and awkwardness, like they knew what was going on but didn't want to get involved. When my wife finally got to him, things got worse. She leaned too close, laughed at his jokes, and even touched his arm right in front of me. It was done on purpose. She asked me to look at it. It was her plan for me to respond and make a scene so she could play the victim again. However, I did not make her happy. Not yet. I stopped being upset and started talking to people as if it didn't affect me. I poured myself a drink and joined in the pointless chatter. But I was boiling on the inside. The last straw for me was hearing one of the guests talking to someone else. Did you hear what they said to each other? The poor guy has no idea how bad things are. That was it. I lost my temper. I was sure of one thing, the night was going to end. This was no longer going to be ignored. I was ready to face my shame head-on now that it had hit its peak. I put my drink down and took a deep breath. When I closed my hands, they were so tight that my fingers turned white, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to put up with her making fun of me any longer. Not in front of these people. Not in front of him. As I pushed my way through the crowd, I caught her eye as she laughed out loud at something Tom said. She didn't even see me come. The air around us seemed to change when I finally got to them. The conversations got softer. People looked around and could feel the stress. I didn't bother getting ready for it. I went straight to find the truth. What the hell is this? I spoke out loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't mind that my voice was sharper than I thought it would be. Are you sure you want to do this? In front of everyone? She lost her smile and looked quickly at the growing crowd. What do you want to say? At first, she tried to sound cool, but I could tell she was scared. You understand exactly what I mean. I made a sign for Tom. There you were, sneaking around with him and lying to me. Now you're acting like I don't exist in front of all these other people. The room was filled with gasps, but my wife's face turned serious. As she got closer, her voice grew quieter. She hissed, "Don't do this here." Why not? I fired back. When you put yourself all over him like I wasn't there, you weren't worried about doing it here. Tom changed his attitude, going from being cocky to protective, but he didn't say anything. He did nothing and let her handle it. Coward. Then it took place. She put out her hand, and before I could answer, her palm hit my face. The sound was loud and rang around the room. It hurt my cheek. The whole party was very quiet. It hurt my ears, and I couldn't even think about what had happened for a second. When I touched my face, I thought I felt blood, but it was just heat from my skin. She yelled, "You're pathetic," and her voice shook. You can't stand the fact that someone wants me. Someone who is nicer to me than you were. The words she spoke hurt more than the blow. People in the crowd looked at each other and whispered, and I could feel their sympathy through my skin. To calm her down, Tom finally stepped in and put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at me like I was a stray dog that had come in without being invited and said, "Maybe you should leave." That's when I lost it. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to let them put me down and then throw me away like trash. I clenched my fist and moved toward them. You think I'm leaving? I growled. Not a chance. I could see the fear in Tom's eyes as he tried to look tough by shrugging his shoulders back. Neither of them was ready for what was going to happen next. I didn't care at that time. I wasn't thinking about what would happen. I wasn't aware that people were watching. I only knew that this was far from over. I didn't think twice. My anger was rising because of the insults, lies, and slap on the cheek that was still burning. They fed my anger like gasoline on a fire. When I got closer, Tom took a half step back, but I wasn't going to let him breathe. I told her, "You think you can just stand there and talk to me like that?" My voice was low but clear enough to break the strain. He tried to keep his cool after fooling around with my wife and making me look like a fool. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. I know you're mad, but this isn't the place for that. I almost laughed. Isn't it the place? When you chose to walk around with her right in front of me, you didn't have any trouble making it the place. I poked my wife in the chest with my finger, but I didn't look at her for long. She stood still, her arms crossed over her chest. I could not take my eyes off of him. Tom finally raised his voice and said, "Back off." He slouched as if he thought that would scare me, but it made me feel more confident. What else? I took a step closer. Some people in the crowd moved back, while others leaned in to see how far this would go. He then pushed me. Just enough to make me take a step back, but that was enough of a reason for me. He didn't even have time to blink before my hand hit his jaw. There was a loud crack in the room, and he stumbled back and almost knocked over the table behind him. There were shouts, but I couldn't understand what anyone was saying. Everything was fuzzy, and the only sound I could hear was the beating in my chest. Tom stood up straight, wiped the blood off his lip, and then he charged at me. As we fell to the floor, we broke glasses and bottles when we hit the couch. When he threw a wild punch, it just missed my shoulder. I grabbed him by the collar and punched him in the ribs. Once, twice, 3 times, until he was out of breath. My wife screamed, "Get off of him," but I wouldn't stop until he pushed me hard enough that I had to hop back up. His nose was bleeding, his face was red, and his eyes were wide with fear. He swung again, but this time I caught his arm, turned it behind his back, and then slammed him into the coffee table. He screamed in pain as he fell to the ground and held his face tight. The glass broke. His mouth and chin were covered in blood, and I saw one of his teeth lying in the broken glass. As I stood over him, my hands hurt and I was breathing hard. The only sound in the room was Tom's groans. My wife ran to him and touched his bloody face while hunched over and crying. She yelled at me, "You're crazy," but I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on him. You want to make me look bad? Do you want to treat me like I'm not important? I yelled, my voice shaking with anger. This is what you get. He couldn't answer, so he didn't. That night was the first time I felt like I was in charge again. But it wasn't even close to being over yet. After the fight, the quiet was heavier than the fight itself. While my wife sat next to him and tried desperately to stop the bleeding, Tom was lying on the floor with blood all over his mouth and chin. He was moaning in pain. She grabbed a napkin from the table and put it to his face while her hands were shaking. I didn't move or flinch, though. I stood there with my hands clenched and stared down at the man who had ended my marriage and the woman who had let it happen. The people around us were still. No one was brave enough to help. What was going on was not stopped by anyone. They did nothing but stand there with wide eyes, waiting for something to happen. I could sense how they felt about me. Their words felt like they were going over my skin. However, I no longer cared. When I moved forward, my wife snapped her head up and her eyes lit up. Didn't you do enough? Her voice was shaking as she spat. Take a look at him and what you did. I didn't even move. Is this really what you want me to say? My words echoed around the room and cleared the air like a knife. You put me down. You hit me in front of everyone and him. You lied to me, and now you want to make me look like the bad guy. She opened her mouth to answer, but I stopped her. You can't talk your way out of this, sorry. I looked at Tom, who was still groaning on the floor, and said, not this time. You are to blame. You made this happen for us. Now you're crying over him even though you lied and cheated on him. Over this trash. Tom writhed in pain as he tried to sit up. He said, man, you're crazy. His words were hard to understand because his lips were swollen. When I charged at him, he jerked back and put his hands up to defend himself. But I didn't stop long enough, I was too tall for him. You think you're the one who got hurt? I barked. You think you can hang out with someone else's wife without anyone knowing and then disappear? How does it feel now? What does it feel like to be open? Fear was clear in his eyes. He no longer had that smug look on his face, now he looked completely scared. As I looked back at my husband, my wife was still on her knees next to him, tears running down her face. And you, I said in a strong but low voice. I hope it was worth it. We lost our marriage, our life, and everything we worked hard for. I hope it was worth it. Her lips were shaking, but she couldn't say anything. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, like she hadn't seen things fall apart so quickly. I took a step back and looked around the crowd. Along with the rest of you, I yelled. I know you've been talking about this behind my back for weeks, if not longer. You've been laughing at me while I walk around like a fool. A few familiar faces caught my attention. They belonged to friends I had trusted, friends who knew the truth but hadn't told me. You're just as bad as they are. Some people turned their heads away in shame, but no one spoke up. My heart was beating fast as I turned to leave. But my wife finally spoke up before I could move on. She screamed and jumped to her feet, wait. Do not do this. Don't just leave. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. She begged, please, and her voice broke. I messed up, okay. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. We can talk about this. She jerked when I turned around so fast. Fix this? What do you think about this? Do you still think there's something to fix after everything you've done and everything I've just seen? And then she looked back at me. Her eyes went back and forth between Tom, who was still groaning on the floor, and me. She said in a whisper, I never meant for it to get this far. I told her, too late. As I walked past the shocked people in the crowd, I turned around and went to the door. I didn't stop, look back, or think about what to do. That was it. I was done with her, the lies, and being the fool everyone thought I was. But when I walked outside and felt the cool night air on my face, I knew for sure that this wasn't the end. Not even close. Even though I left that house, I was still angry. Every step I took down the driveway made it hotter because it stuck to my skin. Some words and hurried steps could be heard behind me, but I didn't stop. I wouldn't let go of the steering wheel until I got to my car, slammed the door shut, and sat there with my hands on it so hard that they turned white. Though my heart was beating fast and heavy in my ears, it wasn't over yet. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My cheeks hurt from being hit by her, and my face was still red. His blood was all over my hands. The worst part was that I never felt bad about it. But as I sat there, what had just happened began to hit me as real. My marriage was over. Everything I thought I had and everything I thought we were building was gone. On the passenger seat, my phone rang. I took a quick look at the screen. Amanda, her name lit up the screen. I let it ring. It buzzed again after a minute. One more call, then a text, then another. Talk to me please. This needs to be fixed. Don't just throw everything away like this. The horn went off for a split second when I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. Fix it? Get rid of it. As soon as she let him into our lives and decided I wasn't enough, she threw it away. I looked at the phone over and over until the screen went black. After that, I made my choice. There it was. I put the key in the ignition and drove. At first, I had no idea where I was going. Get out of the house, away from her, and away from the mess she made in our lives. However, as the adrenaline wore off, insight began to creep in. After seeing that picture, I wasn't angry or ashamed for the first time since then. There was no doubt in my mind, I knew exactly what had to happen next. She couldn't turn this around and blame herself, so I wouldn't let her. It wasn't going to happen that she would come back and beg for forgiveness, only to do it again as soon as she got bored. No, she had already made up her mind. Now it was my turn. I hired a lawyer the next morning. She didn't have time to make up her story. I didn't give in to her attempts to make me doubt myself. I told her I was divorcing her that same day. I had already packed my things when she got home later that night. She begged me to stop as she stood in the doorway with tears running down her face. I didn't even look at her, though. I told her, "Don't cry now," as I put another shirt in my bag. "You can't be the victim." She sobbed, "It was a mistake. I made a mistake, but we can fix it." I finally turned around to look at her. "We can't do that." After that, I left. The next few weeks weren't good. More calls, texts, and efforts were made to make me feel bad or change my mind. But I didn't give up. I focused on getting my life back together after she broke it into pieces. I thought about the slap and the way she looked at him right in front of me every time I started to question myself. It also helped me remember why I was doing this. Tom, he didn't show up again. I don't think he would have the guts to look me in the eye if we ever met again after what I did to him. What I heard is that he stopped seeing her soon after. Perhaps sneaking around wasn't so exciting after all when there were results. As for me, I moved on. It did hurt, I'm not going to lie. It did, and it also made me think of something important. You don't have to beg for respect. It is something you ask for. If someone doesn't want to give it to you, you leave. Because leaving someone is better than having them hurt you and call it love, no matter how bad it hurts.